So hello to those of you who've joined so far. We've still got more people coming in, so we'll just wait a minute or two. But do let us know in the chat where you are coming from today. So if you're joining us from a community group, please do let us know what your group is, where your group's based. And if you're joining us as an individual, it's always nice to know where we're reaching across the county or sometimes the country. I think Australia's our record so far. So if you can beat that, we'll be quite impressed. We'll get started about 2 minutes past, I think. We've got some amazing speakers for you here today to tell you some amazing stories about their community project and the work they're doing in the Cheshire region. We've got people representing Wirral, Cheshire East, Cheshire West, so we've got quite a big coverage here, and there should be something fairly near you, and hopefully lots of inspirational stories to get you interested and enthused about creating wildflowers and places in Cheshire that are good for nature. So let's see, we've got Warrington, got Highley, let's have a look, Bollington, not quite Australia, Stockport, yeah, it's sort of similar, I guess, isn't it? Knutsford, lots of people from Knutsford, I think. Countess of Chester Country Park, let's have a look, Chester, Northwich, Vienna, oh nice. Chester again, Whitchurch, so look, Wirral, Macclesfield, Sandbach, Edinburgh, Tarporley, look, Recorder here, nice to see you. Northampton, lots of people coming in now, that's fantastic to see you all here. Let's see what we're up to participant wise, we're up to 80 now, that's good. Numbers are still going up. Give it one more minute and then we will get started. North Wales, Frodsham, Appleton, lots of places here. Where are we up to in numbers? Let's have a look. Still going up. Ooh, getting a sneak view of the entire presentation there. There we go. Okay, so we're on a couple of minutes past now. I think what we'll do is get started, and then hopefully anyone else joining will start tuning in as we go. So a big welcome to everyone who's joined us here today. Today's quite an exciting event in a way because it's the first sort of sneak peek of our wildflower campaign that we're going to be running here in Cheshire over the next few months, I guess. So we've got lots of speakers here today. They're going to be telling you some amazing stories about the work they're doing across Chester. Cheshire. So we've got lots of different representatives here. We've got Wirral, we've got Cheshire West, Cheshire East, so people from across the county, and we'll be hearing a bit more from them in the rest of the webinar. So what's going to happen is a bit of housekeeping. There's going to be a question and answer session towards the end of the webinar. So we're going to ask all of our speakers to present, and then at the end, after everyone's presented, we will hand it over to you for a Q&A. And there is a chat box available, so if you've got any questions as we go along, please do pop them in the chat box, and then we will come to those at the end. If you want to ask it to a particular panelist, feel free to do that, and just write who you want it to be answered by. And if you don't put that, we'll just put it to the general panel and see who feels up to answering it. So other than that, this webinar is being recorded. Don't worry, only we are on camera and we won't see you. But that recording will be sent to you at the end of the webinar when we send out an email. And also any links to anything we talk about here today, they will also be included in that email, and just so you've got that to refer back to. So don't feel like you need to take loads of notes. It'll all be there for you on YouTube. So I think we've got a good count now. Yeah, as I was saying, today it's the launch. Well, it's not quite the launch, it's the sneak preview of our wildflower campaign that's due to come. So at the end of this webinar, what I really want you to go away and do is take some sort of action. We want you to be inspired by the stories here today. And if you're a community group, I really hope you'll be inspired to do your own little community wildflower project. Or maybe if you're here as an individual, you might want to do something at home in the garden, or you might want to get involved with our citizen science project that we will be giving you exclusive access to for the next 2 weeks before we launch it to the general public. But more on that at the end of the webinar. So As I said, we've got some fantastic guest speakers here today. I'll just do a quick run through of who they are, and then I'll hand over to our first speaker. So we have Hilary Ash joining us from New Ferry Butterfly Park on the Wirral. We've got Hannah Dalton from Cheshire Wildlife Trust, who's our Living Landscapes Officer in the east of the county. And we've also got John Mason here from Forest City Projects, who is working on a roundabout project in Dodleston, but you might know him better from the Super Trees project in Chester. So some fantastic stories here today. I really hope you're going to be inspired. And with that, what I'll do is I'll hand over to our first speaker, Hannah.
Thanks, James. Bear with me a sec, and I'll just share my screen. Right, there we go.
Looks good. Over to you, Hannah.
Okay, brilliant. Hi everybody. Thanks, James. I'm Hannah. I'm a Living Landscapes Officer for Cheshire Wildlife Trust, and I deliver a project called Pollinating Cheshire. The aim of Pollinating Cheshire is basically to bring species-rich wildflower meadows back to the county. So this afternoon, I'm hopefully going to give you a bit of an insight into what the project's all about, a bit about what the Wildlife Trust is doing to address the loss of this species-rich habitat, and along the way, a whistle-stop tour in meadow restoration and how you can create your own meadow. And hopefully this might inspire you to create your own little wildflower meadow haven at home or in your own community space. So first off, why are meadows so great? What's all the hype about? So they're an incredibly important and often overlooked habitat. They offer a really vital food source for all sorts of pollinating insects. So not just bees and butterflies, which often come to mind, but also things like moths and hoverflies, solitary wasps and beetles. And these little insects are just unbelievably important. It's believed that about a third of all food consumed by the human race is dependent on the pollination of plants by these insects. So they're really fundamentally important to us as a species. But unfortunately in the UK, they've had a really tough time of things. And over the past 30 years, there's been an estimated 30% decline in them. And a lot of this is attributed to a loss of habitat, and wildflower meadows are one of these habitats. So as well as being a great place for these pollinating insects, they're also home to a whole host of other wildlife. So things from certain species of reptiles and amphibians to birds, bats, as well as the wildflowers and fungi species in the ground flora. So really important things. And if that wasn't enough, they also have hidden qualities. So they're actually really, really good carbon sink, which is important for climate change. They're great for storing water and absorbing water, which helps with flood alleviation. And if that wasn't enough, they also help with soil health. So these are pretty magical habitats, which have suffered really quite catastrophic losses. Since the 1930s in the UK, we've lost about 97% of wildflower meadows. And unfortunately, the situation in Cheshire's even more bleak, really. We've lost 99% of our meadows, which is really, really terrible considering how important they are. This is generally down to the intensification of farming has been a really big factor, as well as the development of land. So the big switch from hay meadow production to silage creation, which has led to these massive bright green deserts of monoculture grassland, which we see as we drive around, shimmering in the sunshine, has actually meant that we've lost a lot of these species-rich meadows. But all is not lost. Pollinating Cheshire is here, and the Wildlife Trust has seen that there is this really sad loss of meadows and how important they are. And Pollinating Cheshire was set up in 2016 to help mitigate against it. So basically, the project aims at working with all sorts of landowners, from private landowners, farmers, community groups, parish councils, local authorities, and we try and do larger scale restoration work. So we take land like this. This is one of our first sites we restored in 2016. A bright green field was used for grazing on the edge of one of our nature reserves, and we turn it into meadows like this. So this is 4 years after the restoration was carried out, and this meadow is now a complete sea of buzzing in the summer. It's absolutely heaving with butterflies and bees and all sorts of wildlife. It's absolutely beautiful. So moving on, something that makes our project really special is we harvest our own seed. Now, this is kind of sets our project apart a little bit. Because we harvest our own seed, it protects the local genetics, and it keeps the kind of local species alive. We've only got 1% of hay meadows to deal with at the moment. So it's kind of a bit of a limiting factor, but we have our own seed harvester, which is this red beast you can see in the pictures, which we use which brushes the seed off the flowers, and our lovely volunteers come along and help us riddle it out, and then we dry the seed out, and it's then ready to go on our restoration sites. So our restoration sites come from all sorts of people and places. We try and make them into corridors throughout the countryside. But we don't just dive in and say yes to every meadow. There's certain things that we look at and consider before we do any work. And this is probably something which you can take forward on any size plot, and just a few things to consider before you just go out and buy some seed and throw it on the ground. You really want to look at the nutrient levels. So we take some soil samples before we do any restoration. The soil samples let us know how high the nutrient levels are, because wildflowers really like low nutrients. It also lets us know the pH of the field. Now, this is really important when deciding what seed to use. If you're not using local seed, or even if you're using local seed, that you make sure the seed matches the ground that it's going into. As well, you want to look at the soil conditions. Across Cheshire, we have the delights of inevitably incredibly heavy clay or very, very light sandy soil, and it seems to be one or the other. So you want to have a look at what the ground conditions are like, whether they're damp or dry, free draining, and just consider that, because that's another thing which will affect the seed you choose. Something else that's really important is how are you going to manage your meadow in the future? Now, this applies to whether you're a community group and you might need to speak to the council to see if they can change their mowing strategy, or if you're doing a 3-hectare meadow, if your farmer's on board and you've got somewhere to take the hay, is your husband up for scything your meadow in your garden if you've only got a small area? So just something to consider going forward, and we'll talk a bit more about sort of meadow management in a couple of slides time. Seed is pretty major. So we harvest all our own seed for this project, but if it's coming to buying seed for your own projects, there's just a couple of things that I'd just like to kind of sort of flag up for you just to think about. Things to consider is all this, the kind of forward planning you've done, looking at the pH, your moisture levels and things. Tie in your discoveries with the seed you choose. If you can, try and get it from as locally sourced as possible. A lot of the seed you can buy off the internet is harvested from the southern counties, and the times that your flowers go into bloom will be very different from when flowers from up north in Cheshire will bloom, and it will all just be a little bit out of whack from how it would be naturally. So just something to consider, trying to get local. And I would advise you as much as possible to try and go for native species rather than introducing a lot of non-native species. I've put up quite a contrasting picture there. That area, the photo on the left-hand side is a cornfield annual mix, which has got quite a few non-native species in it. This will give you a big boom and bust brash show for 1 year, but then will inevitably kind of disappear the following year. So if you want a big show and it's maybe in your garden, then that's a good route to go down. But if you're looking at kind of a long-term, natural, sustainable option, going for something which is native and got lots of perennials in it, which you can look after and improve on over time, then I just bear that in mind when you're sourcing your seeds. This plant's so important, it got a slide all to itself. This is yellow rattle. It's an amazing plant and really quite vital for meadow creation. It's a hemiparasite, so basically it will come along and really knock back any of your vigorous grasses, which will outcompete your wildflowers. So if you're wanting to really give your wildflower meadow a kickstart to begin with, pick a seed mix which has got loads of yellow rattle in it, because it will really kickstart things for you. Right, so this is the easy bit now. You've done all the hard bit with all the preparation. Actually creating the meadow is quite straightforward. First thing you need to do is create a seed bed. So on these larger scale restorations that we do, we use a power harrow, which generally breaks the ground up to about 80%. So if you were doing this in your garden or in a smaller plot, you could use a rake or even a strimmer or a hoe just to break the surface up to create a seed bed and to break that grass up. Once you've done that, you're ready to broadcast your seed. So for our Pollinating Cheshire project, we've got this delightfully adapted fertilizer spreader, which we use to broadcast our seed. But if you're doing it at home, a bit of a top tip is if you mix a bit of sand in with your seed, it'll just make it easier to distribute and spread it out a bit further. Last but not least, on the restoration and creation side of things, is we roll it afterwards. This basically binds the seed with the soil and just sort of means it doesn't blow away, basically. In a traditional world, this would be done by cows. So I said this was a bit of a whistle-stop tour. Something really crucial about meadows and how successful they're going to be is the management of them. Something you really need to consider is how you're going to look after it going forward. And a meadow, traditionally, you would remove any livestock from the meadow in April, have it shut up, allowing your flowers to flower, go into bloom and set seed. And then you'd look at taking a hay crop in the late summer hay cut. This involves cutting the grass and then basically using a giant whisk on the back of a tractor called a tedder, which dries the grass out and also knocks the seed out. Your farmer's then ready to come along, pick the grass up and bale it. But this is something you could do on a smaller scale, just raking it up in your garden and removing it. It is the same process, just on a smaller scale. And then finally, we do something called aftermath grazing, where you bob some cows on, which trample the seed in, which is something, if you've got a load of children, a load of kids, you could just get them to just run around in your meadow and trample it in for you in your garden. Do the same thing. So yeah, bit of a whistle-stop tour that was. Basically, as the project expands, we're creating more and more meadows, which will allow us more and more meadows to harvest from. So the project will grow and grow, hopefully. I hope that's inspired you to create your own meadows, whether it's in community spaces or on your own land. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop me an email or ask later on. Over to you, James.
Thank you, Hannah. I'll just check if I can get everyone back up if they've not appeared on my screen. And I think, let's go view. There we go. So yeah, thank you very much for that, Hannah. And I'll ask you some follow-up questions, I think, in the Q&A, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move us swiftly on. So next up, we have Hughes from New Ferry Butterfly Park. So lovely chance to hear about a community project that's been going on for 50 years now and has just celebrated its 50th anniversary. So lots of history and lots of information, I think, to be gleaned from this. So over to you, Hilary.
Having remembered to unmute yourself. Right, have you got the screen share up all right?
Yeah, that all looks good to me.
Right, so a very different thing here. New Ferry Butterfly Park. Actually, we're 25 years old, 27 years old, James. It's Wirral Wildlife at 50.
Sorry about that.
So, Old Railway Goodyard, next to Bevington Station in Wirral, managed as a community nature reserve. So we're an invertebrate nature reserve, but of course, lots of invertebrates need nectar and pollen. So we want flowers from April to September. Nature started it in 25 years of dereliction, and we've carried on in 27 years of management. Like so many community groups, it starts with one inspirational person, in this case, Mel Roberts, there showing moths to children from a moth trap. But Mel had been involved in a lot of community things, and he knew that you need a group around you. So his idea really started to fly when he got hold of me, and I got hold of Wirral Wildlife, and our chairman got hold of Cheshire Wildlife Trust, and Mel got hold of the police and the schools and the councillors and the MP and so forth, set up a public meeting, got a steering group, and set about getting the lease, which took us the best part of 2 years. We got the lease in September 93, then built the team to actually run the place. Mel died in 2002, but by then we'd got a big enough team that it carried on. If you want the full story, we wrote it last year. Go on to wirralwildlife.org.uk, go on to the blog for July and August in 2020. You can read the lot. We're a community-run nature reserve right from the start. That was something the Wildlife Trust had to sort of get their heads around in 1992. The way we work it now is that Cheshire Wildlife Trust hold the lease, they're the legal backer. They ensure some of the physical aspects of the reserve, and they do the annual tree safety inspection. New Ferry Butterfly Park Committee raised all the money. We have our own insurance for our own events. We write the management plan. We do all the management, nearly. And we work very closely with a group called Wirral Countryside Volunteers, who are experts in scything and hedge laying and coppicing. It's a locked site because of its history of dereliction and, well, antisocial behaviour. We have it open on Sunday afternoons from the beginning of May to the middle of September, with 2 wardens always on. During the week, we normally take a lot of guided groups, primary schools, children's organisations, everything from nursery school up to university of the third age and professional ecologists. We do a certain amount of corporate work days for our local businesses, and we have a big team of practical workers who do the work in the winter. Obviously, there's overlaps between all those teams. And we run various events. Normally, at the beginning of May, we run a big opening day to say, we're open again after the winter. Obviously, last year and this year, that's not happening. And we get councillors or the mayor or the MP or the Lord Lieutenant or anybody else high profile to come and open that and other events so that we've got them on side should we need their support. That's a 2019 open day with the mayor and mayoress, and that was launching our leaflet for our art trail. We just happened to have built up to 16 outdoor artworks. That's another story. Challenges, well, at the start it was vandalism. The people who had been using it for drug dealing and drug taking and various other crimes didn't like the fact we took it away from them. So we had to grant, hunt and fund security fencing. We had to just keep repairing anti-vandalism and involving the children right from the start. Because as those children have grown up, they've liked the butterfly park, and so they tend not to vandalise it when they're teenagers. Like any community group, we are constantly recruiting new volunteers, as some fall off the top. And we're very glad, actually, that this year we've just been getting our wardens together again. And despite the year's gap, we were open from June last year, but a number of our wardens couldn't do it at that time. But they've all come back raring to go. We did have to fight a court case to keep the site at one point. That's a long tale I'm not going to go into, but if you are working on any such of public land or any land that's not your own, do make sure you've got security of tenure. We've got several ways we've used to increase wildflowers on the site. As Hannah was saying, the important thing is having low fertility soil, especially low in phosphate. If you can only afford one soil test, get available phosphate done, because the legumes need phosphate to fix nitrogen. So if the phosphate's high, the legumes will fix next to nitrogen and your fertility will go up. And do make sure the management's in place. As Hannah was saying, you've got to be able to mow it, at least to mow off the long grass once a year, and preferably take it off, otherwise the fertility will rise. So we've used 4 methods. First one on the lime waste from a water treatment works to get soft water for the steam engines. Remember, we were railway goods yard. This was fairly tussocky grassland when we took the site over. So we stripped off that grassland from half the lime waste. It took us 3 goes over 3 winters. Most of what we let just to come back from what was already there and root fragments, but we sowed a calcareous meadow mixture on 1/3 of it. That time Land Life was growing seeds in South Lancashire. Sadly, that organisation has closed, but we were able to get relatively local seed, and that's where the cowslips came from, which have done beautifully. Other things put themselves in. The orchids came by themselves. There's some yellow rattle lurking in the bottom of there, which I brought in as seed from locally. And the dandelion look-alike are rough hawkbit, which came from a wildflower experiment in Knowsley I was involved with, which was closing. And I brought a few plants in, which said, oh, that's nice, and promptly seeded all over the place. So this is mown down by scythe in usually September, sometimes start late August. It's raked off by volunteers, popped in our compost heaps, rot down. We've got big compost bins. And then we use a motor mower to just run over it and take off any bits the scythers have missed. Further down the site where we're on what we think is the natural clay, but it's never been used as agricultural fields since at least 1830, so 1840. So it didn't have the fertiliser that our modern agricultural fields have had put on them. Here, we've just cut and cleared for 25 years. This is cut relatively early. It's cut in July into August, raked off, motor mower goes over, and then it gets a second motor mower run over in April, because this is normally where we put the stalls for the open day. And over that 25 years, it's got more and more rich in species, including lots of red clover, which the bumblebees love for their larvae. A nearby bit of clay, this is infill from the 1960s. Again, we cut and clear, but we also planted some cowslips and some buttercups, and both have now spread very well. So cut and clear and mow, but also plant in small wildflower plants. And the fourth one is an oddity. We've got siding ballast, of course, and that gives a very stony base to the vegetation. We normally clear about 100 metres square, so a 10 by 10 metre square, except it's never square, each winter. Didn't quite manage all of that this year, but of course we've had problems. Clear it back to bare ground, let it come back from root fragments and seed. And it's particularly to benefit this plant, bird's foot trefoil, which is the caterpillar food plant for the common blue butterfly, 2 burnet moths and a burnet companion moth. And that's what we get. Bird's foot trefoil in the foreground, oxeye daisies behind, a clump of granny's bonnet on the left. We've got all sorts of garden escapes. Open vegetation, very warm, very good for the caterpillars developing quickly. Again, that's mown off in usually September, October, and the cuttings taken off. Also for insects, we have to think of things like shelter and breeding places. Do Google us. We're on both Cheshire Wildlife Trust and Wirral Wildlife websites. And as things ease up and it's possible, we'd be happy to host a guided visit. Do just get in touch with us through the Wirral Wildlife website or through James at headquarters. There you are, James, that's me.
Thank you very much, Hilary. Just stop with sharing screen. Brilliant. We're all back. So yeah, some really inspirational story there for you. So yeah, happy 25th anniversary to New Ferry and happy 50th to Wirral Wildlife there. I think I got it right that way around. So as I said, we've got questions coming in as we go through this. So please do submit your questions in the question and answer box. We'll come back to Hannah and Hilary after John's had his chance to speak. So I'll just quickly introduce you now to John. John's been working on the super trees in Chester, and he's part of Forest City Projects, who have been working on an even more exciting project with loads of wildflowers in Dodleston. So I'll pass you over to John now for him to talk to you more about that. I think you're on mute there, John. So, yeah.
Thank you, James. Yeah. So Forest City Projects, we were set up in 2019 to coincide with the establishment of the Super Trees project in Chester. So my screen isn't moving on. There you go. Yeah, so we've set up as a community interest company in 2019 to manage the space that is now called City Forest Garden, where the super trees are in the centre of Chester. We work in partnership with Cheshire West and Chester Council, and we have constituted with the aim of promoting urban biodiversity, engaging people with nature and wildlife, and basically engaging people with wildlife with the view that if people are going to engage with the climate and ecological crisis and some kind of solution to it, they need to experience and love wildlife first. And what we try to do is bring a creative spark to projects and pull together different organisations and stakeholders to add to the sum of the parts that's available and to deliver things quite quickly. So this, for anyone who doesn't already know it, this is the space as it is. Well, this is last year. So having been established in 2019 and then gone into lockdown in early 2020, our aspirations to create a vibrant community group and lots of community maintenance of the space haven't yet taken off. They are happening, but essentially lockdown exercise was largely me weeding this space, because the periphery was planted by the contractors for the council. The central areas were sown and planted by the community. This is what was previously in the space. It's basically a roundabout. It's the centre of a roundabout on the Chester Ring Road. Next to, if you go back a slide, oh, sorry, can't go back a slide, apparently. There you go. So Chester Cathedral, you can see on the horizon there, bus station on the right-hand side, and Mecca Bingo. So we're on the Ring Road in the centre of Chester. Previously, when the Ring Road was built in the 60s, it was a garden space, and I think it was quite well used for quite a long time. But then crossings of the road at ground level and a general dislike of subways led to this space really being quite abandoned. For a number of years, it's been, as you can see, neglected, and it became a place where there was lots of antisocial behaviour. So that's why it was selected as being a good opportunity for a new urban garden space. And the inspirational character in terms of the person who's kicked it all off, Steve in the middle of the photograph there, Steve Hughes, he watched the Gardens by the Bay, featured on Planet Earth 2 with David Attenborough, as being a really spectacular example of urban greening. And he watched that programme and said, I'm going to do that in Chester. And lo and behold, he did. So that this I'm going to rattle through a few slides, because super trees isn't really on topic. It's connected. It's not a meadow, but you could describe it in a way as being an urban meadow. It isn't by any means strictly natives. In fact, quite the opposite. We are anything that's got a flower and is attractive to insects and birds is fair game, and it's very, very diverse in terms of the planting. And it's also got to be appealing to people as well. So we want as much colour and attractive imagery all through the year to attract people down there. We've got quite a spectacular planting of giant alliums, which were very popular last year. And you can see just about starting to, the super trees will have climbing plants all over them eventually. They're just starting to get established. And we've also already got vibrant populations of butterflies and bees and hoverflies and everything, all within that space. Even though it's in the middle of a busy road in the centre of Chester, it's full of wildlife. And we also took into the creative side. We've engaged an artist to paint some wildlife as well. And actually a new addition to the artwork actually was finished off earlier this morning. I won't tell you what it is. People need to go down there and find out. But there's another similar type of piece of art down there. So I'll get on to the topic of meadow creation. Doddleston Hare project. It was I think because of super trees, people heard about that, and we were approached last year by Meadow Foods, who have quite a large food factory on the edge of Chester. I think it's primarily a dairy, but they're also getting into oat milk and plant-based products. And they've been keen for a long time to do something with the roundabout outside their factory, partly because people drive past them because it's a bit anonymous, and they wanted something a bit distinctive, a sign of some kind. They've been trying to do something with the council for a number of years. They're trying to sponsor the roundabout, all sorts of things. Everything's come up against the buffers. So they heard about super trees, realised that we'd actually achieved something quite good there, and asked if we could help them. So our brief was to create something more attractive, something distinctive. There's a picture of the roundabout there, as it was a few months ago. We brainstormed the projects. The obvious, with the Meadow Foods, it was obvious to try and create some kind of meadow, but a meadow on its own, it wouldn't be especially eye-catching or appealing. Well, appealing, but not necessarily going to, you drive past this quite quickly. We wanted something that had a stronger hook to build the project. And one of our directors, Sam Riley, he's a wildlife photographer, and he'd photographed hares in the local fields on a number of occasions. So that was, we felt was an appropriate species to feature. It could be a good focal point and a good metaphor for, because hares are declining and meadows are declining. It's quite a good metaphor for the overall aspiration. So this is I don't know if some of you may have used a Miro board. It's an online collaboration tool. So we did online what we call the hack, which is a workshop, just playing with ideas to see what kind of project we could put together. And we came up with the idea of having a hare trail with the roundabout being sort of central focal big project that everybody hears about, but there's also in the background another set of things happening to do around hare conservation and just building a better knowledge of wildlife in the local community. So we approached a local artist that we know, Russell Kirk, and he came up with some concept sketches initially, which we then developed into a more photoshopped concept to sell to the client, which they loved. And so then we started off building the project. We worked with Cheshire Wildlife Trust and Record, the local wildlife record service. And what we've got is effectively a project which builds on the back of the publicity that the hare sculpture and the roundabout will generate. Dodleston, which is an under-recorded area in terms of wildlife. We're hoping that some citizen science can start happening, and also some creativity, children making their own little sculptures of hares. We've sent out packs to every household in the village with a pack of seeds and this leaflet which we've produced. So everybody's got enough seed to generate a couple of meters squared of wildflower meadow in their garden, should they choose to. We've got some information about local species that they might want to spot. And on the other side of this leaflet, there's instructions on how to build your own cardboard hare. And there's already a few appearing in the village. So in terms of the actual meadow creation, it's not ideal because it's a rich topsoil roundabout, which was produced when the roundabout was constructed. We think there's probably 30 or 40 centimetres of rich topsoil. It's been growing a nice crop of ryegrass and dandelions for however many years. We did explore options of completely taking away the topsoil, stripping it and finding a source of subsoil or even perhaps a poorer topsoil or some sand, so that you've got conditions that are more suitable for wildflowers, similar to the ballast that Hilary was describing earlier, and less suitable for vigorous grasses and other kind of dominant species. Unfortunately, cost was prohibitive, so we've compromised, and what we did was we took away the grass, so we've stripped the turf effectively, and so we prepared our site for seeding by manually taking off the turf, and wish we'd had the power harrow that Hannah was talking about earlier, because I couldn't believe me that stripping turf without such machines is very hard work. In terms of seed mix, we used a northern company, not a Cheshire company. There's a company called Naturescape, who I actually, in my day job, I've been working on a few meadow projects over in Nottinghamshire. And Naturescape, who I've been working with them over there, and so they seem like a logical source. They're one of the biggest suppliers in the UK in terms of growing their own wildflower seeds. And what we've gone for is it's very different to the meadows that Hannah was describing. It's very much a hybrid. It's going to be very showy. It's going to have a strong mixture of cornfield annuals, and we're actually using quite a lot of wheat and oats, which will have they're associated obviously with the food manufacturing theme of our sponsor Meadow Foods, but also in exposed conditions, a small meadow of cornfield annuals will tend to get sort of wind blown and damaged by rainstorms. What the cereals should do is provide a good stout framework for the other species to grow up amongst. And we've also got perennial species as well. So in terms of future maintenance, it's not 100% clear. It's going to be a case of seeing how the meadow develops. It may be that we have an interventional approach where we prepare the site each year, reseed each year with annuals. It may be that we simply accept that the meadow will become less showy, and we just do a cut and collect and develop a more depleted fertility through removal of cuttings. So we've got a few slides showing the hard work that was undertaken without power harrow. We had a turf stripper, but unfortunately it didn't work very well. It had no drive in it, so we had to push it along. It was back-breaking work. And we spent a day and a half, 2 days removing, we think, in the region of 30 tons of turf. We stacked it in bags around the edge of the roundabout, and it was collected by local supplier Dandies. So it'll be all used in the production of topsoil that will be sold to gardeners, or compost or something similar. And what these slides illustrate is how what we've managed to do is to add value by combining with local suppliers. So Dandies, and obviously they're benefiting from the material that they collected from us, but that was they collected the material for free, and the other machinery on site is all in the possession of it was a company called Ringway, who are one of the highways contractors for Cheshire County Council, or Cheshire Western Cheshire Council, and they basically installed our foundations for our sculpture, and they did all our traffic management, which, if we paid for it at commercial rates, would have been thousands of pounds worth of work. They did all of that for free as part of their corporate social responsibility. So that kind of added value is something that's really worth thinking about when you're developing your own projects, in terms of what can there are people out there offering free services if you approach them the right way. So there's the hair being welded onto its metal base. So yeah, it's been sown 2 weekends ago, so I think it's just coming up to two weeks. So nothing's showing yet. Hopefully, in a few weeks' time, we'll have a nice flowering meadow to take some more photographs of, and anybody visiting the area should be able to see. So that's it for my slides. I've got an email address there if anybody wants to contact us. I think, James, you'll have that on the pack of information that you're going to distribute to people. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Okie doke. So I'll just put us all back on the gallery. There we go. So you've heard from our three amazing speakers there today, and we're going to hand it over to a question and answer session now for the next sort of 10 minutes or so. So if you've not already submitted a question, you've still got time, pop it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll put that question, well, as many as we can, to our panel. So Hannah, do you want to just unmute yourself as well for this? And Hilary, I think you're unmuted, aren't you? Right, so our first question, let's go for Hannah. Let's start with this one. Can you recommend suppliers for us to get the seed? Do you know out of any, or?
Well, as I said, we generally harvest our own seed. If we do buy it in, we use a company called Force Start, which they're actually not even Cheshire-based, they're a Shropshire-based company, but they have a meadow and very similar in character to the ones we create. So yeah, Force Start seeds where we go. But it would definitely be worth a Google just to investigate, or just ask, you know, when you go to your seed nurseries, just ask the question, where do they get their seed from? Because it's not necessarily where the company's based. They might be based in you know, Lancashire or something, but harvest their seed in Dorset. So it's just worth asking the question where each individual mix is coming from on an individual basis, I would say.
Thank you. And obviously John suggested another supplier there as well. So you've got
I've used Naturescape as well. I would say they're a reasonable one to have a look at.
There we go. So a couple of suggestions for you there. Let's go back to Hannah again. So what are the best times of the year to sow yellow rattle seeds?
We generally do our sowing kind of towards the end of the season, going into about sort of September time. Just because we use fresh seed, just generally, yeah, that kind of time, and then your seed's dormant over the winter and then gets going in the summer months. So that would be when I would recommend. Hilary might be able to advise a bit further on sort of specifics species wise on that one.
Yeah, I mean, normally with there's two sowing windows. The best one is late August through September to beginning of October, which is the time the seed would naturally be shed. It is possible to sow at this time of year through April. It'd be better if we had a bit of rain, but don't often say that in Cheshire, do we? So John's one is all right. If you're sowing onto bare ground, like John's roundabout, then yellow rattle needs the exudates of grass roots to make it germinate. It also needs cold treatment over winter. So yellow rattle isn't a good one to put in at this time of year. You're better holding back and sowing the yellow rattle with fresh yellow rattle seed in September. So it's got a bit of grass to latch onto, and it's cold over winter. So it can be tricky, yellow rattle. It can take off like everybody's business, or it can sulk.
I might go back a step here, Hilary, actually, because there's a question. Someone's mentioned that they're struggling to stop grass taking over their site. So do you want to perhaps just explain yellow rattle and why that's important?
Well, yes, yellow rattle is hemiparasitic on a number of things, but mainly attacks grasses. And that's it, latches its roots onto the grass roots, and it takes some of the energy from the grass. Now, if you've got grass taking over, it's probably your fertility is a bit high, and it's plague of all urban sites and most rural ones in this country is the fertility is too high. So do get your management going to take off the cuttings every year. That may be well include, if you can't graze it, and obviously we can't graze New Ferry Butterfly Park, then doing a late winter cut in March, taking off anything that's grown over the winter will get a bit more fertility out, and doing the main cut in late July, August, depending on your species. It's have to accept that a natural meadow would have a lot of grass in it. You know, traditional meadows we've lost did have a lot of grass in, a lot of different grasses in. It won't be a wall-to-wall flower bed.
Thanks, Hilary. So I might actually answer this one and then probably come to you again, Hilary. So any tips on persuading the councils to stop mowing? So my first advice on that one would be to perhaps just contact your local councillor. So they're the local representative for your area. A lot of the time they can be quite receptive. If you don't perhaps get a result from that, you can always contact the cabinet member for the environment, or sometimes highways if it's road verges. So you could perhaps go through a few channels there. Hilary, do you have anything you might want to say on that as well? Because I know you work closely with Wirral.
Yeah, well, Wirral Borough Council actually, it's declared a climate emergency and an ecological emergency. like many councils have. So do remind your elected representatives of that. And they actually decided they were going to have a pollinator strategy, a pollinator action plan, which included altering mowing regimes on a certain number of verges and parks to, first of all, just let the wildflowers already there flower and seed. And we're doing a number of those this spring. Now, we have had some kickback from some local residents who want everything neat and tidy. And because of COVID, the council didn't do anything like enough publicity before the scheme started. So prior publicity, talking to communities, and then putting pressure on your elected representatives, I think, is the way to go about it. If you can say to your elected representative, no, it's the community want this, make them work for you.
Brilliant, thank you, Hilly. Let's have a look what else we've got. So, right, so someone wants to plant a meadow strip outside their house along the roadside verge. How would they go about it, and where could they get the seed from? Should we go to you, John, for that one?
Well, first of all, seed isn't necessarily the right thing for a verge outside your house. It might be less disruptive to, as long as you can get the management right, to use some plug planting. So if you buy small plants, and you get more of an instant effect, you'll see what's working and what isn't more obviously. If you sow seed into an existing grass verge, it's very difficult really for those species to get established. You could scarify it heavily so that you've got lots of exposed soil, and that might give the seed a chance. But I would definitely consider plug plants.
I think you might have answered Brian's question there as well. He was asking if plug plants would be worth considering. So it seems to get a thumbs up from our panel.
Yeah, it's what we're doing. What one little residents group in Wirral is doing with their little bit of amenity grassland in the close. They're trialling clearing little patches about a foot square, and then putting 3 or 4 plugs or small plants into that. And if you don't want to actually buy them, although you can buy them perfectly well, you can just buy a little bit of seed, and any gardener will grow them up into little plants. Sow the seed now, plant them out in the autumn. Key thing is, because it's a verge outside your door, it probably belongs to the council. Well, that means it really belongs to all of us, but the council's responsible for it, and you'll need to get the management agreed with the council before you can get anywhere.
Okay, so I have another interesting one here actually. I don't know quite who wants to come in on this, but someone's mentioned that they've got a uni campus who's spraying herbicides on the ground before sowing seeds. To try and give the wildflowers a chance. Now, is that good practice, or is that something to avoid? I might go to you maybe on that, Hannah.
It's a bit of a contentious issue, really. For the Pollinating Cheshire projects, it's all very sort of site specific, the use of kind of weed killers, for want of a better word. If you're working on a sort of small area to restore, then it might be possible that you can combat your kind of vigorous grasses and any weeds, so things like dock and thistle and that sort of thing, you could do manually by hand, and therefore potentially you don't need to use glyphosate. However, if you're dealing with a sort of 5-hectare field which has got a problem with dock, you've got to weigh up the pros and cons. So in that situation, if you had a dock laden field, we would spot spray the dock to kill that off. But we generally, as a project, use glyphosate as little as we can. But the problem is, as soon as you disturb the ground, you're creating a seed bed for your invasive weeds, which can really take hold really quite rapidly. So you want to get on top of your weeds before you break your ground up. So it's just how you go about that is dependent on the site, the type of weed you need to control. Have you got anything to add to that, Hilary?
Well, I know what Land Life did actually develop this technique in Kirby, in North End of Liverpool, where they did some big areas. This was amenity grassland, but wasn't terribly fertile amenity grassland because it was all slopes that dated from the creation of the new town. And they did cut it close, spray it off with glyphosate, and then drill the seed into the mulch that was basically created by the dead grass. And that was successful, but again, it's very site specific. It was on an infertile site where they didn't need to do John's trick of stripping the topsoil off first or anything else to reduce the fertility. And it was large scale. But we now know, that must be 10, 15 years ago, we now know much more about the effect of glyphosate on soil invertebrates, which is bad, particularly on earthworms. So obviously, ideally, you do it without herbicides if you possibly can. But as Hannah says, sometimes you do have to actually resort to it. Soil fertility, again, is the key. The less fertile soil, the less likely you are to have docks.
The key sort of message there is it's really only used for invasive species, and it's probably not something the wider public are likely to encounter, I wouldn't imagine. So yeah, because obviously we've been running on neonics petition to try and ban the use of neonic pesticides. So we really would encourage to go pesticide free, do that manual weeding. Obviously there are isolated cases of invasive species that we perhaps do have to consider, but other than that, best for wildlife is probably to go pesticide free. So
could I start something there, James? What I would say is that even if you're working on a small site, if it's just a domestic garden, the experience I'm recalling is having an allotment a few years ago and taking over an allotment that was very weed ridden. And if you don't put the time and effort in the beginning to eradicate those problem species, they'll come back to haunt you. So if you don't want to use herbicides, say, for example, you're doing a small site, it might be that you just repeatedly remove manually. But there is a huge weed bank of weed seeds that will be in your soil that will keep growing even after you've taken away the first set. Now, you could cover it over with a mulch or cover it over with a plastic or a cardboard mulch, but it inhibit it and try and get rid of as much as you can before you sow your meadow, because otherwise you might feel like you've wasted your time in the end.
Okay, so I think we're running very short on time. So I just want to signpost you. A couple of people have asked some more questions. There are many resources that we have on Cheshire Wildlife Trust website. So as I said, after this webinar, we'll be sending you a link and an email, and in that email we'll have lots of different links to lots of the resources, but you can do a quick search on our website for some of them, usually under the Get Involved tab, and you'll find lots of different options from there. But one final thing I'd like to just tell you about before we all break off is our citizen science project that we have surrounding Cheshire's road verges. So if I just quickly share my screen before we move on. Ooh, it's disappeared there. There we go. So having a quick run through all our presentations there. If I just come to the end here. So there's lots of things we want you to do. So first of all, if you are really enthused about wildflowers and you're perhaps a beginner and want to know more, we have our wildflowers guide that we've just released. So you can download that, and we'll be sending you a link to how you can download that in the email afterwards. But as I was saying, yes, we've got this Road Verge Citizen Science project, and as webinar participants, we're giving you sort of exclusive early access to this for the next 2 weeks before we launch it for No Mow May. So what you can do, if we follow the link here and it loads up, which it is doing very slowly. But essentially, we want to map Cheshire's road verges. So we're aware that there's lots of road verges in Cheshire, but we don't actually know the condition of them. Some might be really good for wildlife already and want to be mowed less. Some are potential opportunities for a restoration. So we really want to do a big sort of litmus test as to what our road verges are like. So what you can do as a member of the community and the public is you can take a photo of road verges near you and you can submit it to us. And what we're hoping to do is build a big map across Cheshire of all the road verges that we found, and I'll be handing this data over to our conservation team, who will be taking a look, and we'll be giving it a colour code as to whether we think this is something that could be mowed less, something that perhaps could then go on to be designated as a local wildlife site, or perhaps an opportunity for restoration that a community could perhaps adopt at the end of the year. So I'm really sort of turning this over to you. If you've been enthused by today and you're thinking perhaps you want to get involved but you don't know how, this is a really good starting point. Just taking a photo of road verges near you, submitting it to us. It's really quite easy. I'll send you this link in the email, but you just have to submit your road verge photo. A little bit of time. There we go. Just upload the file, give us a postcode for where it is roughly and some details of the location. House numbers that it's nearby might be helpful, or perhaps some more specific street names would help us. And then we can just have a look at that, review it, and see if it could potentially be something that a community could adopt. And the end goal really is to see if we can build up this big map of all the road verges in Cheshire. And if you're a community group watching today, it might be towards the autumn time we say, look, could you adopt a road verge for the community? And maybe one day we can achieve something like Kent have. So I think this would be my big goal. If we could achieve this, Kent have done these roadside nature reserves in their part of the county. And you can see from the map here, they've got absolutely loads that have been adopted. So if we could achieve something like that in Cheshire, I think that would be absolutely fantastic. So that's really everything from today. Apologies if we didn't get to answer your question. Please do feel free to send an email to us if we didn't manage to answer your question today and you'd like a little bit more help. But as I said, we will be sending some resources to you and a link to this webinar. So a massive thank you to Hilary, Hannah and John for joining us today and sharing more about their projects. It's been really inspiring, and I hope you'll really want to go home and take some action. So thank you very much for today, and hope you have a nice evening. I'll stop.